Clara's disappearance was a kind that sent shockwaves through her quiet hometown, the kind people whispered about in grocery stores and gas stations for weeks. She was the kind of woman everyone noticed, not because she sought attention, but because she carried herself with quiet determination. At 27, she worked long shifts at the local diner and spent her evenings helping her younger sister with schoolwork. Her life was simple, predictable, and grounded in routine, which made her sudden absence all the more chilling. On the night she vanished, she was last seen leaving work just after 10 p.m. The weather was calm, the streets almost empty, and her route home was familiar, a straight road bordered by dark woods on either side. She had driven it countless times before without incident. When Clara's car was found hours later, abandoned by the roadside, it looked as though she had simply vanished into the night. The driver's door was open, the keys still dangling in the ignition, and her handbag lay on the passenger seat with money and ID untouched. To investigators, it appeared less like a robbery and more like she had been ripped away suddenly, without a chance to resist. Neighbors recalled seeing her headlights flicker down the road. Then nothing, just the silence of midnight swallowing the street. Her family's panic grew unbearable as minutes turned into hours and then days with no sign of her. Search parties combed the woods, flashlights sweeping through the underbrush, calling her name into the darkness that offered no reply. Every theory seemed possible, an abduction, a runaway, or something darker. But deep down, her sister insisted Clara had not left by choice. Something sinister had happened on that lonely stretch of road, something carefully planned, something that left Clara trapped in a nightmare no one could yet imagine. Clara's first moments of awareness came with confusion and terror. She opened her eyes to total darkness, a suffocating black that pressed in from every direction. The air was thick, stale, and carried the sharp scent of damp soil and rough wood. When she reached out, her fingers struck a hard surface only inches above her face. Her arms stretched to the sides and found the same unyielding barrier. It was then she realized the truth. She was inside a box. Panic surged through her body, her chest tightening as she gasped for air that seemed to vanish faster than she could breathe it in. Her mind raced, trying to piece together what had happened. The last thing she remembered was driving home, headlights glowing on an empty road, and then a sudden shadow, the screech of tires, and nothing more. Now, every detail of her surroundings confirmed the unthinkable. The walls were wooden, roughly nailed together, and each small movement sent a faint groan through the planks. She pushed with all her strength, but the wood refused to budge. The space was so small she could barely bend her knees, and every shift sent a wave of claustrophobia crashing over her. Then came the sound that confirmed her nightmare. Above her head, faint but unmistakable, was a steady scrape of dirt falling, trickling down between the cracks, whispering against the box. She was buried. Somewhere above her, layers of her sealed her fate, and the realization stole the last fragments of calm she had. Her fingernails clawed at the lid until they splintered, her breath coming faster, fogging the stale air. Time lost meaning. Minutes stretched into hours, each one reminding her that whoever had done this wanted her erased, hidden away where no one would find her. Yet in that crushing darkness, a spark of defiance began to grow. Clara's body ached as the hours dragged on, every muscle screaming from a cramped position. Her throat burned from the stale air, and each breath felt thinner than the last. Panic had nearly consumed her, but somewhere in that suffocating darkness, a stubborn will to survive took hold. She forced herself to think, to search for any weakness in the coffin-like prison. Her hands traced along the corners, fingertips brushing over splinters, until she felt something, a small crack in one of the boards. It was faint, almost invisible, but it was enough to spark a surge of desperate hope. Using the last of her strength, she began pressing against the weak spot, ignoring the pain as it splintered beneath her fingers. The box groaned, and soil sifted down through the opening, choking her lungs and stinging her eyes. She coughed violently, but she kept digging, clawing through the packed earth with her bleeding hands. Every movement was slow, agonizing, but she pushed forward inch by inch, driven by the thought of the world just beyond the soil. Her mind wavered between determination and despair. Several times, the crushing weight above threatened to collapse back into the hole she made, threatening to bury her all over again. Still, she refused to stop. The earth was heavy, but the fire inside her was heavier. She scraped, pulled, and shoved, forcing her body upward through the suffocating tunnel. Her lungs burned for air, Her nails were torn, and her arms trembled with exhaustion. Then, finally, her hand broke through into the open night. Cool air rushed against her skin, sharp and sweet like freedom itself. With a final surge of strength, Clara pulled herself out of the grave, collapsing onto the wet grass, gasping under the endless sky. She was alive. Clara did not go home after escaping the grave. She should have run to the police, collapsed into her family's arms, or sought the safety of crowded streets, but her mind was no longer guided by fear. What had been taken from her in that box was more than her breath. It was a trust in the world. Someone had buried her alive, someone who wanted her erased, and she could not rest until she knew who it was. Survival had lit a new fire inside her, a fire that demanded answers. She began piecing the puzzle together in silence. Memories sharpened into clues. The screech of tires, the sudden shadow on the road, the way her car had been left behind without a trace of struggle. This had not been random. It was planned by someone who knew her habits. She remembered the people closest to her, and a name rose unbidden. Her ex-partner, Daniel. Their relationship had ended bitterly months before, filled with anger and threats she had tried to ignore. Now those words returned, echoing in her mind, no longer empty but loaded with intent. Clara watched from a distance, studying him the way prey might study a predator. She learned his routines, the bars he frequented, the isolated paths he walked at night. Each observation confirmed what her instincts already knew. He was the one. There was a cold satisfaction in knowing she had uncovered the truth, but it was not enough to simply know. The law might question her story, might demand evidence she did not have, and so Clara made a choice. She would not be the frightened woman abandoned in a box underground. She would be the reckoning that came for him in the dark, silent and unstoppable. The night Clara chose to act was heavy with rain, the kind that blurred the streets and muffled every sound. She moved with quiet purpose, her footsteps steady despite the storm soaking her clothes. Her mind was clear, sharper than it had ever been, guided not by panic but by the certainty of what she was about to do. She had spent weeks waiting, watching, and now the moment had come. Daniel would finally face what he had forced her to endure. He was alone, just as she knew he would be, in the same wooded stretch of road where her nightmare had begun. The darkness around them was almost identical to that night, but this time, Clara was not the victim. She struck swiftly, with the precision of someone who had rehearsed every step in her mind. He never saw it coming, never had the chance to resist as she dragged him toward the pit she had prepared. The box waited, its rough wooden boards a mirror of her own prison. Every sound of hammering nails echoed louder in Daniel's ears than it ever had in Hayes. For Clara, each strike was not just an act of vengeance, but a reclamation of her power. She sealed him inside, listening to the muffled cries that rose from within, the frantic thuds of fist against wood. She did not waver. Clara stood over the grave, rain running down her face like tears she refused to shed. She remembered the suffocating darkness, the hopelessness he had left her in, and she knew this was justice in its purest, rawest form. Walking away, she felt no fear, no hesitation. The storm swallowed the sounds behind her, and with every step, she left the past buried where it belonged.